If you don't know me, my name is Joe Kreidel. I'm one of the owners of Armadillo Boulders. I've been climbing for 20 plus years and have been fortunate to climb, all over the country, all different kinds of climbing styles. So just kind of excited to share information to people who have been climbing in the gym a while and are interested in getting outside. This is the first time I've done one of these little Zoom presentations, so if there's any technical glitches, I apologize. I worked through it a little bit, but I may have a few little slow points where I'm trying to figure some stuff out. Thank you to Ricky, who's on here, for making this look good. I'd been wanting to do this at the gym for a while, and one of the things that was kind of inhibiting it was that I had all the information on there, but it looked terrible, and Ricky cleaned it up and made it look really good.
But you had really great photos.
If we do end up going back to mute, there should be a little chat thing that I think some of you guys found. So if you just want to, if you want to try to say something while we're doing this to ask a question, that's great. If you want to just enter it into the chat, I can see that and answer any questions. But if you have any questions along the way, please feel free. If I start talking too fast, you can't hear me very clearly over my microphone, feel free to tell me that too, because sometimes I get excited and start talking really fast. But yeah, so the goal of this presentation is to kind of encourage people to start getting outside, to give people a little bit of information on what are the first steps. It can be kind of daunting sometimes if you've been climbing in the gym for a while and you hear people are going climbing outside and you're interested, but you don't really know where to start. So this is hopefully something that can help you with that. It's not gonna, you're not gonna be going to Yosemite and climbing 3,000 feet next weekend, but hopefully maybe get you some ideas of where to start, some of the aspects of outdoor climbing that maybe you weren't aware of, and just kind of excited to get outside. So with that, if you have questions, please let me know and we'll get started. So this is Gym To Crag. Adventure is a big part of it. Safety is something I'm trying to really emphasize a lot in this, as well as stewardship a little bit, being good representatives of climbing and taking care of our climbing areas. So brief outline is just kind of where to begin. What are the first steps to get going? Talk about that a little bit. We're going to emphasize safety because it's a very different experience climbing outside than inside. The gear you're going to need, what you're going to want to pack, some of the hazards of climbing outdoors that you may not be aware of, some of the etiquette and the rules and regulations of climbing outside, and again, stewardship, and of course, safety, safety, safety. Just want that in the back of everybody's mind as you start to consider going outside, the most important thing is doing it safely with smart, responsible partners and kind of staying within your comfort zone so that you don't get in over your head and get hurt. Like in the gym, we do our best to create like a nice, safe environment. We don't even try to use the word safe. It's, climbing is dangerous. And we do our best to make it, mitigate risk everywhere we can so that it is as safe as possible. But once you go outside, you're responsible for your own safety, your partner's safety, managing risk, and being responsible for that. So it's a really important thing to always remember. All right. Anybody have questions so far? All right. All right, so where to begin? What do you want to climb? What are your goals for the trip? Do you want to go bouldering, sport climbing, trad climbing, top rope, deep water solo, aid climbing? All of those are available within like 2 hours of San Antonio, which is kind of cool. Texas isn't like, we're not as fortunate as Colorado, Utah, Colorado to have tons and tons and tons of climbing. But in Central Texas, we do have quite a bit of good climbing. pretty accessible, and there's a lot of options. What are your goals for the trip? So, if this is your first time going outside, you just want that first experience to be really fun, not scary, good. Do you want to try your first lead climb? Are you interested in taking kids outside? Are you want to try like your first highball boulder problem? So think about what your goals are for the trip, and how you're going to achieve those goals. And then, do you have proper gear and instruction? And we're going to go over gear a little bit, but making sure that depending on what you're interested in climbing, that you have the right gear to be safe, and and your partners know how to use all that gear. You could spend $2,000 on a trad rack at REI tomorrow, but if you don't know how to safely put, the cams into the rock, then it doesn't do you any good. So you want to make sure that depending on what your goals are and what you want to tackle, you know how to use the gear to get that done, or you have the right people to help you with that. And that leads to, John has a question. What is trad? So traditional climbing, that's where, so bouldering is, what we do at the gym. There's no ropes. You use crash pads outside. Sport climbing is where the bolts are already in the rock. So you climb up, you clip the bolt with a quick draw, you clip the rope into the quick draw. Traditional climbing is where there's no bolts, there's no fixed anchors already in the rock. So as you climb, like typically it's where there's cracks and natural features, and you put, I'm gonna grab some gear, it's right here. Yeah, that's a good question, John. So traditional climbing, or it's called traditional or trad climbing for short. There's no anchors in the rock. Let me make sure. So as you're climbing, you're going to be placing your own protection. And the two most common pieces of protection you might use are these two. So this guy is called a cam, and this is a nut. And so if you imagine a rock and there's a crack in it like this, I'm trying to see if I know. All right. So I've got a record sleeve. If this is a crack in the rock, you take this cam and you see how the lobes contract? So it's called a spring-loaded camming device. So I'm going to contract the lobes so they get skinnier. I'm going to slide it into the rock, release the trigger, and those lobes push against the rock, and that's your protection. So this is going to be in the rock, and then you're going to clip the rope into this for your protection. How reliable are they? These are super, super strong. Like, these aren't going to break. But what is important is knowing how to place them well. If you place this in really solid rock, placed correctly, they're really reliable. It takes a little while to get comfortable. I've only fallen on these a few times. Typically, if I'm going trad climbing, I'm not trying real hard. Usually, if you're climbing something big that's like 600, 1,000 feet, typically those are trad routes where you're placing your own gear along the way. So when I do things like that, it's usually well below my climbing limit for like sport climbing or bouldering, where I'm just trying to get a lot of climbing in. But also, like, I still don't feel 100% confident in myself for these. It takes a lot of practice to get really comfortable with it and to be really fast and efficient with placing the gear. But there are people who climb really hard stuff, take huge falls on these, and they do fine. The other kind is a nut, and this is a little bit different because it doesn't move. But if you imagine a crack that is constricting, you're just going to slide this, go from above, and slide it into where the crack is narrowing, and it's just going to get stuck like that. And then you're going to clip it here and do the same thing. So that's your protection. So that's trad climbing. Who is a good trad climber to watch on YouTube? A good one might be, there was one not too long ago. I think it was called Tribe. His name was Jacopo Larcher. That was a pretty good video. It showed him working a really hard trad climbing route. Well, I was going to say free solo, but that's not a good one because he's climbing El Cap. But like the Dawn Wall, if you watch the Dawn Wall movie, you'll see some of that is bolted and some of it is, them placing cams. Dirtbag Doc, great. I'll look that one. I haven't seen that. Yeah, or just look up trad climbing movies. You'll find some. Yeah. So, and if you're not sure, like aid climbing is where, if you're trad climbing, you're climbing and you're using these for protection. Aid climbing is where you're using gear like this, or maybe even old school pitons that you're hammering into the rock, and you're not physically climbing it, you're using the gear. So you're going to clip into this piece of gear and like pull on it. You're going to put a piece higher and you're going to kind of like just hoist yourself up with it. So you're not actually climbing with your hands per se. You're just using gear to ascend the rock. And that's aid climbing. Like old school climbing is like hammering in pitons and just going up that way. So for some people, like your first time going outside, it's not a bad idea to hire a guide. If you're unsure if you can manage the risk safely, if you haven't found a good person to help take you outside, some people hire a guide for their first time just so they feel really comfortable and they know that the next time they go out, they'll have some good skills and good practice. Other resources for planning, guidebooks. We have a few good guidebooks for Central Texas, like Enchanted Rock has a climbing guide. Austin Sport Climbing has a good guide. And then there's like a Texas bouldering guidebook that's pretty good too. And then there's a lot of websites out there too. The big one is called mountainproject.com. And that's like a big database of climbing all over the world. And so you can search on Texas, look at all the different climbing areas. There's routes listed as well as pictures and sometimes like information. So if somebody likes a route, they might say, oh, this is a great route. Or if they think it's terrible, or if they're like, hey, there's a beehive in this route, you might want to avoid it. So sometimes it has like good local information like that. So this is just some of the main areas around Texas that people like to go to. And we can come back to this later if people want to talk about this more. The big one you may have heard of that's really popular is Reimer's Ranch. It's a sport climbing area. Enchanted Rock. We'll talk about that a little more in a second. McKinney Falls is a really popular bouldering area. It's kind of well known for being pretty hard. It's in the south part of Austin. It's like classic bouldering where it's these short overhanging walls and it's real crimpy, small holds and pockets, real hard on your fingers, but kind of really fun bouldering. It's kind of like the moon board outside. The Pecos River has some really good climbing. The picture that's in the background here is the Pecos River. And what I really like about the Pecos is it's beautiful. You're just in this really nice scenic canyon. There's really good limestone. There's currently some access issues that I've heard of. Maybe climbing isn't really allowed. I'm not 100% sure right now. Hopefully that'll get cleared up soon. Another popular area is the Austin Greenbelt. Like right in the city limits of Austin, there's tons of climbing on the Greenbelt. There's sport climbing and bouldering. It's real popular. So on the weekends, if you want to go find a partner, if you're not afraid to like just walk up and say, hey, can I climb with you guys? There's a lot of people there usually, and you can just find somebody to climb with. Pace Bend is a popular place for deep water soloing, which is, if you don't know, climbing over the water. It's on part of Lake Travis, and there's limestone cliffs coming out of the lake, and you can, climb as high as you feel comfortable, and then just fall into the lake, swim around, and try it again. Rogers Park outside of Temple has a lot of really good bouldering. It's limestone bouldering. And then outside of El Paso is Waco Tanks, which is one of the best bouldering areas in the world. And then just for fun, I put on there Fontainebleau, France, which is another one of the top bouldering areas in the world. Definitely on my bucket list. And then once you start climbing outside, one of the coolest things about it is you start traveling, and it just takes you to, some of the most beautiful areas. I mean, even just some of the spots in Texas, like Enchanted Rock is just gorgeous, and Reimers, they're really pretty. But if you go out climbing Colorado, Utah, Canada, there's just so many beautiful areas that you're immersed in and you're getting to climb. So it's pretty cool. Reimers is probably the most popular area in this part of Texas. It's not a bad drive from San Antonio. Super easy walking, easy approaches. A few of my favorite climbs there are Middle Earth Cave. Hello World is an easy 5.8 at Middle Earth. Reimers is really good at like the 5.10, 5.11 level. There's a lot of really good climbs. One really good 5.10 is called Momfie. And then there's this picture behind on the screen is a really classic 12A called Liposection, which is really overhung, all these big stalactites and tufas. It's a really, really cool climb. The other really popular area around here is Enchanted Rock. And Enchanted Rock, maybe some of you guys have hiked there or climbed there, but big granite domes. There's trad climbing, there's sport climbing, there's top roping, and there's also really good bouldering. A little bit further drive than Reimers, and some of the approaches, the walk-ins, can be a little bit further. Some of it can be like 10 minutes away. Some of the approaches can get close to 45 minutes, but there's a lot of really good climbs out there. Some of my favorites that I listed are Jackknife to Cave Crack, which is a really fun 2-pitch trad climb. And when we say, like, sometimes in climbing we talk about pitches, and that's essentially like a rope length. So if you're going to do Jackknife and Cave Crack, the leader would climb up, and then the follower would climb up, and then you do it again. So it's a multi-pitch climb. So when the second person is climbing the second pitch, you're belaying from halfway up the rock and not on the ground. So multi-pitch is where you're going like, 200, 300, 400 feet up. Ripple is a really classic 5.9 on the backside, a really fun slab. Fear of Flying is the crack on the right side of the screen. Just a beautiful, beautiful layback crack. And then a route I really like there is a 5.12 sport climb called Geisha Girl. A lot of the sport climbing in Enchanted Rock is really sharp, and Geisha Girl is not. So I think that's why I like that one a lot. There's also lots of good bouldering. There's an area called the Dairy Farm Boulders, which is a really good spot if it's your first time to go bouldering. The landings are really good. There's a lot of easy like V0, V1 problems. There's a V0 that I listed as a good one, Dairy Farm slab. There's a good V2 called Lunar Arete, is one of my favorite problems there. It's on a later picture. And then there's a really good V5 at the Dairy Farm called Frogatron. Just a few classics to consider if you're gonna head out there. Get a quick drink of water. All right, so you're gonna be heading outside. What's the lowest grade at Pace Bend? Yeah, at Pace Bend, you can find some pretty easy stuff. I mean, there's like 5.7, 5.8. Yeah, definitely. If you can climb greens at the gym, you can have a blast there. The one thing to be aware of at Pace Bend is in the last several years, there's these little muscles called zebra mussels that have gotten really bad. So sometimes right at the water level, there's all these little sharp muscles that can kind of cut your shins or your feet a little bit. So you want to wear climbing shoes and just be aware of zebra mussels. Not to deter anybody, but just something to be aware of. Skipped a page. So you're preparing to go outside. You need to be ready for the outdoor elements. You're going to be hiking. There's going to be exposure from the sun, the wind, the elements. We're in Texas. You're not going to get caught in a blizzard, a snowstorm, but you still want to be comfortable. And if you show up at Reimers at noon and you're wearing shorts and a tank top, 4 o'clock, the cliff might be shady and the wind starts blowing. You might be chilly. So it's always a good idea to have some layers, some rain gear, and just kind of be prepared for the weather, what may happen. You want to be prepared for any unexpected events. It's hard to get lost in the climbing gym, but if you're going climbing outside, at Enchanted Rock, it's pretty easy to get lost. So you want to maybe have a map. You want to have some good information on where you're going. Both Reimers and Enchanted Rock have dead spots for cell phones, so you can't necessarily rely on those. So you just want to be prepared in as many ways as you can, including trying not to get lost. You want to be prepared for any injuries or accidents. A lot of climbers will have like a small stuff sack that they will have with them at all times that has like their little emergency kit, like a headlamp, climbing tape, a small first aid gear, maybe a multi-tool. So all those things that if you get a small injury, if you get lost, if you get stuck in the dark, you've got a headlamp and you're ready to go. And just another way to try to be as safe as possible. The main thing is just be prepared. Know what you're getting yourself into when you get ready to head outside, and be prepared, not just with climbing gear, but your own personal gear. So then the climbing gear, what climbing gear are you going to need? Obviously that's going to depend on what kind of climbing you're doing. If you're going bouldering, maybe you just need a crash pad and spotter. If you're going to be setting up some top ropes and not doing any lead climbing, you just need a good anchor setup, belay device, harness, rope, maybe a little bit of extra safety gear. Sport climbing, you're going to need quick draws, as well as belay device, harness, rope. And then trad climbing, you're going to start needing to get into all that other good stuff. Trad climbing is very gear intensive, and it's a much bigger financial investment to start. So just something to consider. It's always good to have a friend who helps get you into trad climbing. How much do you expect to spend for sport climbing? Sport climbing, at a minimum, a few $100s, depending on if what maybe some potential partners have. Ropes, a rope can run anywhere from, you can get one on sale sometimes for $125 to $250. Harness can be $50 to $100. 10 quick draws is going to cost you about $125. A belay device, an ATC, the cheaper belay device is maybe $20 if you want to invest in a gree, which is like the assisted style. That's $100. So it's a little bit cheaper to get into, but if you're buying, you're still going to be spending several $100s if you're starting from scratch. Sometimes you can find, really good deals online if you keep your eyes open, and maybe you can get away a little bit cheaper. But for better or worse, climbing, the initial investment in climbing is a lot. Gear usually lasts a long time, which is nice. But you got to spend some money up front to get it. So then once you have your gear, some things to think about with bouldering, it's where are you going bouldering, and do you have sufficient pads and spotters? Some, most Texas climbing areas, the bouldering has pretty good flat landings. Other areas, like if you go to some areas in Colorado, it's basically a talus field where there's just jumbled rocks everywhere, and they have to maneuver. They take 15 crash pads and build like little landings out of them so that it's safe. But most areas in Texas, like Enchanted Rock, McKinney Falls, if you're going to go bouldering, a good crash pad and a good spotter, you should be okay. It's always good to have more, but just at a bare minimum, you want to have a good spotter and a good crash pad. If you're just going top rope climbing, you want to consider how are you going to anchor up there. So you're going to need some slings or some webbing. You're going to want to make sure that your rope is running smooth up there. You don't want your rope. So one thing, if you hike to the top of a cliff to set up a top rope, you also want to be really careful up top. Sometimes you may have to lean over the edge to set the anchors in, and you want to be really careful doing that. The other thing to consider is making sure that when you set your rope, that it's running really smoothly and it's not running over any sharp edges. Because if your rope is running on a sharp edge and you're going to have like 5 or 6 friends all top roping this route, then that rope is just going to like rub on that sharp edge a lot. Potentially causing some damage to the rope. Ropes are extremely tough and durable, but you want to minimize that wherever you can. And then the most important thing is that your belayer and everybody who's going to be belaying understands how to use the belay device. Whether it's an ATC or a gree-gree, that everybody is solid with that belay device and that everybody can feel comfortable with their belayer. The other important thing, 2E, it says close the system. And so what that means is, so if I'm tying in to climb, the other end of the rope, I want to tie a knot in that end of the rope, the other end, not my end. Because sometimes the routes are long enough, like at Enchanted Rock, if it's a 100-foot route and my rope is 200 feet long, when I'm lowering back down to the ground, that rope is going to be at the very end. And one of the most common ways climbers get injured is by being lowered off the end of the rope or rappelling off the end of their rope because they didn't tie a knot in the end. So whether you're rappelling or if you're top roping or sport climbing, you want to close the system and make sure there's knots in both ends of the rope. Does that make sense? If you're like Reimers and the routes are 40 feet tall, it's not as important. But there's definitely places at Enchanted Rock where, you climb up and then you're being lowered down, and when you hit the ground, you're right at the end of the rope. And it's very easy for the belayer to make the mistake of accidentally letting the rope slip through, and then you're going to hit the ground. So you want that knot on the other end of the rope. If you're going sport climbing, a few things to consider is if you can safely clip the first few bolts. Sometimes the first bolt might be a little high and maybe the ground isn't real level and there's a lot of rocks. So you might want to bring a stick clip, which if you're not familiar with, I don't have an example of that, but it's like a painter's pole with a little widget on the end that helps you get the first quick draw in the rope already clipped in. So right as you leave the ground, your first piece of gear is already up. Sometimes the bolting at some areas isn't done real well. And, if the second bolt is poorly placed, I'll just clip the second bolt too. Cause if there's a risk of hitting the ground at any point, like I'm going to stick clip it. There's just no reason for that to happen when you're sport climbing. You want to make sure that from the ground, you can see all of the bolts and your anchors, so you know how many quick draws to bring. If you don't pay attention and you start climbing and you have 5 quick draws, but you actually need 8, you're going to have like a hard decision up there, like, oh, I'm out of draws. What do I do? Again, make sure your belayers knows how to use their devices. That's the most important, piece of safety equipment there is. So, and it's surprising, like if you go to a place like Reimers or Greenbelt, you'll see some really poor belaying. And sometimes that's scary. You don't ever want to like look over and see your belayer have his hands off the rope. But that happens. So make sure your belayer knows how to use the device and that they're using their brain and being safe. You also want to understand how to break down the anchors at the top. When you get to the top of the climb, are you going to lower off? Are you going to rappel? Sometimes you have to clip in and untie your rope and thread it through the anchors and retie. And that's kind of like beyond this little discussion, but it's good to know once you get up to the top, how are you going to finish the climb? What's going to happen when you're all done with this route? And then gear considerations for trad climbing. This is a really, potentially like 2-hour long discussion in itself. But you want to make sure you have more than enough gear. Sometimes if you read the guidebook, like it'll be like, oh, you need 4 pieces of gear for this 50-foot climb. And maybe the guidebook author only needed 4 pieces of gear, but you might want 10 pieces of gear because you don't want to go 15 feet before you place your next piece. So you want to make sure you have plenty of gear. You want to know how to use it. You want to know where you're going to anchor. Like if you're doing a big multi-pitch climb, you want to know, okay, we're going to climb up to this ledge. We're going to anchor off this tree, and then you're going to climb up, and then the next anchor is up here at this other ledge. You want to make sure your rope is long enough that you're going to be able to lower to the ground. You want to close the system again. You want to make sure that system's closed. There's knots in both ends. You want to make sure that all of the gear that you place and all of your anchors you place bomb proof. That's a word that climbers use, like, oh, it's bomber or it's bomb proof, which means it's just completely solid and you can trust it. If your gear is bomb proof, if your anchors are bomber, you can trust your gear and you can be safe. So you always want everything to be super solid. Again, make sure your belayer knows how to belay. And then for trad climbing, a lot of times you end up rappelling off of these bigger formations. So you want to make sure you and your partner know how to rappel and where the rappels are. Sometimes you get to the top of this big formation, but the rappel anchors might be like 100 feet over. So you want to know before you get to the top, like, okay, how do we get down from here? Especially for trad climbing. And if you're going to be like, let's say you're just going for like a family vacation to Yosemite and you want to do a little bit of climbing, that's when it really is like a good idea to hire a guide to take you out, give you a good experience, spend a little bit of money just so you can be safe and have that really memorable time. With trad climbing, especially more than like sport climbing, is mentorship's a big thing. Getting somebody to really teach you all of the nuances of fiddling that gear in, how to be safe, how to deal with safety considerations, because like the last line here, in trad climbing, the stakes get really high. If you're 300 feet up a wall and you drop your belay device, like, what do you do? Or if you're rappelling and like you're pulling your ropes down because you finish this rappel, you get to the ledge, sometimes you pull your ropes and they get stuck in like a crack. I'm like, all right, what do you do? So anytime you're doing like bigger climbs or doing trad climbs, you want to really make sure you understand your systems, you know how to be safe, and your partner does as well. All right. So now we're getting ready to climb. One of the really big things with climbing, and especially when you're rope climbing, you need to have partners that you trust, and you need to have partners that you can communicate really well with. You want to have a good communication system with your partner, which starts with, you guys might be familiar with, like when you're starting to climb, you ask like, on belay, belay on, climbing, climb on. And through that whole process, you're double checking each other, you're checking your harness, your knots, your belay device, you're checking the rope and making sure everything is safe, triple checking each other. But then you also want to make sure you guys can communicate as you're climbing. Can you watch me here? I may fall. Um, you know, Andrew and I were climbing. We went to, a few of us went to Squamish last fall. And our first climb that we did, which was a multi-pitch, Andrew and I were going up, and I led the first pitch, and we got out of like earshot. Like he couldn't hear me when I was at the top. And I was trying to like pull the rope and tell him he was on belay, but he wasn't climbing. Usually, like we didn't establish this beforehand, but it's good to be like, all right, you're like, I'm going to tug on the rope 3 times, and that means you're off belay. But we didn't really, we were so excited to be there. It was our first climb. We just started climbing. It took like 40 minutes of me yelling at him yelling at me, not being able to hear each other before finally like he started climbing. Because I had pulled the rope so tight that it kind of got stuck in the gear and he couldn't unloosen it. So if we would just taken like 2 minutes beforehand and like worked out a communication system and said, hey, Andrew, when I get to the top, you're not going to be able to hear me. So here's what we're going to do. We could have saved ourselves a lot of time. And if you're the climber, like, don't be afraid to be vocal about what you need. Tell them, all right, I'm a little nervous, watch me tight, hold the rope tight, give me, whatever you need, you need to be in charge. Especially like bouldering too, a lot of people are terrible spotters. So if you're outside bouldering with somebody, don't be afraid to be like, all right, you stand here and you put your hands here because I might fall when I make this move. They don't always anticipate where falls are going to be. So if you feel like you want somebody standing like right here, you tell them like you stand right there. So communication and trust are really important for climbing partnerships, especially if you're going to climb with somebody a lot. It takes a while to find those people, but once you have somebody that is a good, reliable partner, it's a really good thing. You want to make sure that everybody you're climbing with that day understands all the components of the safety system, whether it's crash pads, if it's anchors, fixed gear, bolts, trad gear. Everybody needs to understand all of that stuff. Again, this is always super important, is attentive, focused belaying. And if you're the climber and you see your belayer like spacing out or, watching somebody else climb, like, you tell them like, hey, I'm climbing, you watch me. And when you're outside, you need pretty good situational awareness at the crag. You want to be aware of like any weather that's rolling in. If there's, other climbers nearby that are acting unsafe, that, maybe they're doing things that are going to impact you. If they're climbing the like next route over and they're like swinging around or they're kicking loose rocks off, you want to be aware of the people around you as well. And if you see people like that, like if you see something, say something. We don't want anybody getting hurt at the crag. So if people are acting unsafe, don't be afraid to tell them. And in climbing, like double checking and redundancy is super important. That's one of the main ways that we mitigate risk as climbers is by everything being redundant. Like you want, at your anchor, you want 2 bolts. You want to double check your harness 2 or 3 times, double check each other, and just make everything redundant. Ratings and expectations for climbing outside. This one's always like kind of tricky, like because grades indoors and grades outdoors don't translate real well. So a lot of people will feel really confident climbing inside, and then they'll go climb outside and expect to perform at a certain level, and they'll be a little disappointed because it's a really different experience. And even like climbing in some different areas, like the limestone at Reimers and the granite and Enchanted Rock are so very different. The climbing style is different. So if you come from the gym, you'll probably climb pretty well at Reimers. It's got a lot of like nice, good holds. And so maybe you go and you climb like a 5'10" at Reimers and you feel really good. And then you go try to climb like a 5'10" at Enchanted Rock. It's going to be really different and feel a lot harder because instead of like pulling on holds, it's real delicate movements on bad, really small holds, but it's a little bit slabby and you're just moving slowly and carefully. It's a different experience. So until you like spend more time outside and understand the nuances between like limestone or granite or sandstone. Don't have like really high expectations for performance. Just try to enjoy the experience as much as possible. That's the main thing. Then again, redundancy. Check everybody again. We want everybody to be super safe. Kind of like I was talking about, like finding a climbing partner. Oversight and partnership, super important. A good climbing partner is always looking out for their safety. They're looking out for your safety and the safety of everybody you're climbing with. You want to always be making sure, everybody around you is being as safe as possible. One of the main ways that a lot of experienced climbers get hurt is they get kind of complacent about all these little double checks. You'll see some people at Reimers who've been climbing a few years, and if I say like, en belay, they're like, oh, I don't do that. I'm like, okay. But it's that like getting kind of cocky and being complacent about all of these little details and double checking each other. That leads to accidents because people get in a hurry, you overlook something small, and that's why your partners are there to double check everything and make sure everybody's being safe. You don't want to take shortcuts because you feel like it's easy. You're always being safe, because accidents happen not just to beginners but really experienced climbers, because they try to take shortcuts. You forget to double check each other. People worry more about like speed and efficiency instead of safety, and then that leads to injuries, unfortunately. Just harping on like attentive belayers, and then if you see something, say something. If you see unsafe behaviors at the crags, don't be afraid to call people out. Like even if it's even if you just like perceive maybe they're doing something wrong, even if it's me, I could make a mistake out there, and I would appreciate it if somebody like told me. Is there a certain quality that you look for in a partner? Experience. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, really, one is that person fun to be around? Because if you're going climbing with like one person, you're like in the car for an hour and a half, you're hiking for an hour, you're spending all day with like this one person. Like if they're not fun to be around, yeah, maybe they're a good climber, but that's not going to be a fun day. That's a good hard question. Yeah, for me, safety is a big thing. Like there have been people in the past that like I went climbing with, and I didn't go climbing with them again because their tolerance for risk was way higher than mine. So it just led to situations that I wasn't really comfortable in, and I didn't want to be there when this person took a nasty fall. So I think just like personality, somebody that you can communicate with, somebody that you can trust, because I mean, you're truly trusting these people's lives. If they're holding the other end of your rope when you're climbing, like their life is literally in your hand. So you want to trust that they're going to, carry that weight and, hold up their end of the bargain. What is the time commitment to climbing outside? Yeah, that's a good one. If you're going like sport climbing at Reimers, sometimes we'll leave at like 8 and I'll have to be back home at like 5, and it works. It's a shorter day than I would like. It's because of the driving involved in Texas, most areas are going to be an hour and a half drive. So just that, you want to make it worth it. So it's not worth driving an hour and a half to climb for like 30 minutes and then come home. Once Medicine Wall is open in San Antonio, it's an area, it should be open like later in the summer. It's a place that it's just outside of 1604 in Northwest Military. It used to be open to the public. It got shut down when there was a rappelling accident there. The landowner took out all the bolts, but the Access Fund, one of the local organizations, and the Texas Climbers Coalition now own the land. They own the cliff, and they're kind of in the process of working with the city because it's right on the Salado Creek Greenway. So once the path is finished to it, they can start bolting it and doing trail work. And then we'll have like a local cliff, like right in the city. Yeah. So once that is open, like maybe that's a 15-minute drive from your house. You'll go drive, climb for an hour, and come home. It'll be no more commitment than going to the gym. Sometimes we'll spend the night. Like I've got kids, so sometimes it's hard unless I'm taking them out climbing. It's a little bit harder to like spend the night in Enchanted Rock. So I don't mind day tripping. It's called Medicine Wall. And you can look up some information on mountainproject.com. The climbs are listed there. Or if you go to like Texas Climbers Coalition webpage, there'll be some more information on the land. But then like a few times last winter, I went to like Waco Tanks for, a few days and spent the night out there. Sometimes we'll camp at Enchanted Rock and go climbing. So it's, that's like a whole nother component is you can go out like the Pecos River, you can camp out there and it's super pretty. The camping in Enchanted Rock is really nice. You can camp at Pace Bend right on Lake Travis. So that's pretty cool. So it's a good way to like get a lot of climbing in the weekend to camp out there. All right. Just a few more slides. Yeah, going back to safety. So these are some of the like hazards you need to be on the lookout for when you're climbing outside. These are things we don't worry about in the gym. We have a nice air-conditioned facility. Nothing should ever fall on you. We've got nice clean holds that are bolted into the wall. But outside, you want to be on the lookout for like loose rock and rock fall. And, people push really hard for people to wear helmets when they're climbing, which is a good idea. I guess I forgot to include that on my gear list. Helmets are a good idea. But helmet is important for belayers as well, because if a climber kicks like a little loose rock off, if that hits you in the head, it doesn't take a very big rock to do a lot of damage. I've had a few close calls with friends who ripped big, huge chunks of rock off the wall and almost got me, but I've been lucky. Reimers, it's not that big of an issue because so many people climb there that all the loose rock has already come off. Enchanted Rock, it's not too bad. But if you go to some more like adventurous areas that haven't seen as much traffic, there's definitely potential for loose rock. Bad bolts, you want to, if you're sport climbing, you want to be able to learn how to tell if like a bolt, most of the bolts are like super solid, super good. But if you see one that's like spinning, it's not in the rock real well, you want to learn how to identify bolts that maybe you don't want to trust as much. Like you'll probably clip it, but you'll know that like, all right, I need to be a little more careful with this one. Again, weather, Texas, we don't have like nasty alpine conditions, but just being aware of the weather is always good. It's not fun to be up, like trying to do a multi-pitch route and you're, 200 feet up the wall and then it starts to rain on you. That could happen to you at Enchanted Rock. Bad landings in bouldering are pretty important to be on the lookout for. You can use crash pads to mitigate that a little bit, and good spotters, but make sure your landing zone is going to be as good as you can make it. Ledge falls, this is a common way that people get injured climbing. A lot of broken legs, broken ankle, not a lot, but it's one of the more common ways that people do get hurt. Landing on a ledge. So if you climb like 50 feet up and you come up to this nice ledge that you can rest on and stand, and it feels good to like, take a break there for a minute. But once you start climbing above that ledge, if it's, sticks out a foot from the wall, you can fall and hit that ledge with your feet, and it can cause injury. So you just want to be aware of that. And then like wildlife, bees, spiders, snakes, poison ivy, cactus, do your best to avoid those. All right. So the next couple are kind of the same thing, is like outdoor etiquette and just kind of climbing etiquette. Because once we go out there, we're sharing the outdoor environment, not just with climbers, but a lot of times there's hikers out there, people just picnicking. By Reimers, you're right by the river. There's people canoeing or kayaking. So you just want to be as respectful as you can of other people that are out there, and just be aware of, your volume, things you might be bringing, including like dogs, kids, and how those are affecting other people there. You want to make sure that wherever you go climbing, you know the rules and the regulations, because whether it's like a state park, like Enchanted Rock, if it's a national park, like the Pecos River, or maybe it's private land, like Medicine Wall, you want to be following those rules, not just so you don't get in trouble, but so that like climbers as a user group, get judged on how climbers behave. A lot of times when, there's a few bad apples, people aren't following the rules, regulations. A lot of times land managers will close climbing. They're like, oh, we don't like climbers. You don't get to climb here anymore. So we want to avoid that. The other thing with outdoor etiquette is like you got to go to the bathroom. Just understanding where's the nearest toilet. If you're at Reimers or Enchanted Rock, they have, toilets at the trailhead. But if that's too far, like, what are you going to do? Some places have rules and regulations for that, where you just got to use kind of leave no trace ethics to do your best to, make it simple. So a little more on like the climbing etiquette is that you're sharing, you might be sharing a climbing wall with another group, and just being aware of like the time you're taking. Nobody likes the group that goes and they top rope like the most classic 5'9", and they just spend all day on the one route, and then like nobody else gets to do it. So if that, if you're using a route and there's another group, feel free to like offer them to like, hey, you guys want to come in and take a turn? Just kind of being aware of how you're using the space, not taking up too much time, being aware of the people around you. And then like volume for voices and music. Some people like to bring, music to the crag, and if you're the only ones, that's fine. But if there's somebody climbing next to you and they're trying to concentrate, or they're, it's their first time, they may feel uncomfortable if you're blasting your music. May make it harder for them to stay focused belaying. So just be aware of that. If you're bringing like dogs, kids to the crag, some places like Enchanted Rock, you're not allowed to bring dogs. Waco Tanks, you're not allowed to bring dogs. So some areas, like, you can't bring them at all. Or if you can, just kind of be aware, like, everybody loves like the super awesome, cute crag dog that hangs out, says hi to everybody. But there's also like the really bad dogs that are rummaging through people's packs and eating their lunches, and nobody likes that dog. So just kind of being aware of like how your dog is going to behave in that situation if you decide to take him. Oh yeah, and Ricky said the Access Fund sent a guide about climbing during the coronavirus. So that's good. I haven't seen that yet. And same with kids. Like, I take my kids out climbing, but just being aware, it's hard to juggle like me trying to climb what I want to climb, but also monitoring my kids, especially when they were younger. So if you're going out with your kids, like, just making sure that you find that balance between your kids running around, being a nuisance for other people, and you getting to climb. Again, like safety, if you see something, say something. If people are being unsafe around you, just let them know. Beta spraying or telling people what to do on the wall. Like, experienced climbers don't like people down below usually saying like, oh, hey, just do this, put your left hand up here. People like to figure it out for themselves. So just like a little piece of etiquette is like maybe asking if they want the help before you let them know. If somebody's a true beginner and it's their first time, they usually don't mind if you say like, hey, grab that big holdout left. They're usually grateful for that. But if somebody else, you can spray bait at Ricky. And then like careful up top. Like if you make it to the top of the cliff, or maybe you're walking off, maybe you're setting up a top rope up above. But one thing that can happen is if you're up there and you're not paying attention, you may start kicking rocks down, and then there's people below you. So you want to make sure that if you're up high, you're not a hazard for the people below you. And then lastly, this is the last slide, is just stewardship. Trying to leave these really amazing places we get to go, leave them better than we found them. Trying to practice like leave no trace ethics, obeying the rules of the land. All these places, again, like maybe it's a national park or a state park or private land, they tend to have rules for us to follow, and it's a good idea for us to do that, so that we can be good representatives of climbers as a user group. Because I've definitely lived places where bouldering areas or cliffs got shut down and we weren't allowed to climb there anymore because of the actions of just a few people. But that also, we want to take care of these areas and minimize our impact as climbers. Trying not to, like if you're bouldering, putting your crash pads on like dirt or rock and not right on top of plants, not leaving excess chalk or tick marks, minimizing impact with anchors. And then there's like really good organizations that like help us with these things, maintaining relationships with landowners and securing access to climbing areas like Texas Climbers Coalition, the American Alpine Club, and the Access Fund. So, if you start climbing outdoors a lot, it's a good idea to look into those organizations and see if you can support them. Yeah, but that is the end of the slideshow. So thank you guys for stopping in and listening. Hopefully it gave you guys a little bit of information, maybe some inspiration to get out there. If you guys have any questions, I can try to unmute you guys if you guys just want to ask questions or hit them in the chat room, or if you got to go, do what you got to do. I don't think I can unmute you guys though. It won't let me. All right.
I was just saying we need to find more friends. Apparently that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
Show all this cool stuff or
yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, if you ever want me to bring it to the gym, I'll let you play with that stuff.
I've done top roping, but I always wanted to do the sport climbing.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be like,
Oscar, I'm trying to unmute you. Oh, there we go.
Oh, but like I want to do sport climbing in a really safe environment because it terrifies me.
Yeah, it's a. I'm trying to, let's see.
Yeah,
okay, Bethany's unmuted.
And beforehand, where I was living, there wasn't any climbing, so now I'm like excited to start climbing again.
Yeah.
And I've now I was the one who asked like how much is buying everything, because I want to like start buying everything, and then I need to find someone to start climbing with.
Yeah.
So do you know if Armadillo Bouldering has like a group of people that that go out climbing regularly?
Yeah, we have quite a few people that are starting to go out a lot. There's a little message board in the gym. You can put a little note like, hey, I'm new to town, looking to go outside. Like, some people will say like, I'm going out on weekends, or I'm going out every Wednesday. And then letting people know your experience, like, if you can belay, or if you're looking for somebody to teach you, you can do that. There's also a San Antonio Rock Climbers Facebook group that has some activity, and so that's another good place to be like, hey, I'm hoping to go out to Reimers this weekend. Can I tag along with anybody? A lot of climbers are pretty good about like, yeah, like come with us. If you just put yourself out there a little bit, most likely somebody will take you outside. Yeah.
I think I was lucky I met some people at the gym and started going outside, and I didn't buy anything other than a harness. And then I was recommended what to buy after that. And that really helped a lot. Like
Yeah.
I had my harness, and then after I climbed, I'm like, okay, I need this, this, and this. So yeah.
Yeah, like having a shoes and a harness. Most likely, if you're just going to be tagging along with folks at first, like that's all you really need to start. And then once you start climbing more, if you want to start buying stuff, then maybe you'll have like partners like, hey, I'll buy a rope if you buy quick draws. You can divvy it up that way. Awesome. Do you guys have any more questions?
How long for medicine wall do you think?
Good question. I don't know.
No.
Yeah.
Not even an estimate? Like
I would say probably like early fall.
really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just reading on it, and it said mid 2020, so sometime this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, there's still some work being done on the trail. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully soon. It should be this year though.
Do you know if like the armadillo bouldering will have like a
Hi,
group
John.
that can go out?
We won't have an official group. A couple of us from the gym are working on getting like some guiding certifications so that maybe we could do it a little more officially. But a lot of people are going to be excited to start going out there. And like once that is open, I bet it'll be really easy to just walk up with a harness and shoes and be like, "Hey, can I climb with you guys?" Because there's going to be a lot of locals, a lot of people who are like not like brand new, but pretty new to outdoor climbing that are going to be safe enough, but know what they're doing. That they'll, most climbers remember what it's like to, your first time and you're trying to get outside. That, most people are pretty friendly and will let you climb with them. So yeah, if you haven't found anybody else, just start going out there and hanging out and just begging people to let them climb with you.
That's good.
All right. Bye guys.
Well, sweet. Thank you guys very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Yeah. Have a good day.